This podcast is sponsored by askROI.com.
The political side of it, and then there's the real story.
There's a lot to unpack right there. It wasn't quite the interview I thought that was going to be.
There's a reason for it.
This will be officially my favorite podcast I've ever done.
I don't know why. It just feels like this book is really, really well written. I've never seen the format where all the presidents are in a row and you can flow through their experiences, the troubles that they've had, right? So I'm just curious as to the format. Is the format any similar to the Killings series at all? Because it felt different to me. Like this was it's just really easy to read.
Well, all my books are easy to read because I'm a simple man, Todd. I mean, if I write books the way I want to read them.
Right.
So if I got an 800-page book on Calvin Coolidge, I'm not reading it. Even Calvin's mom wouldn't read it. So what I do on television is keep it pithy, get to the point, no spin, boom, 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 boom. But what separates Confronting the Presidents from the 13 previous killing books is that this is obviously multi-dimensional. So we go to 45 different subjects, whereas the book before it, Killing the Witches, we had 3 main themes in the book.
Sure.
So you go from 3 to 45, you have to do it in a way to hold the reader's attention. Now, one of the ways we did it was to list all 45 chapters in the beginning of the book, so if you don't want to read from Washington to Biden straight through, you can skip around. I think it's better to read the whole thing, as you pointed out. You see how the ebbs and flows of history affect the individual men, but you can do it either way. But my most important point is I want the books to be fun to read. And that's why we're the best-selling nonfiction authors in the world.
Yeah, I couldn't, it's one of the rare times, there's only like another time in my life where I could not put a book down, and that one of my favorite writers is a guy named James Stewart, who wrote The Den of Thieves and all kinds of other books, and I'm a Wall Street guy, so I love his writing and love reading about history, but when I was a kid, I was obsessed with U.S. government. In fact, Mr. Jorgensen, who I went to, was my teacher in high school, who taught U.S. government, like I got just very motivated by understanding this, and what I took from your book so far, and the hard part is, I think when you start reading it, you don't really want to put it down because you kind of want to see what's next, which is, I just don't find that is I'm sure that's maybe the way people write, but I just found this, for this topic, incredibly engaging. I loved it, but I wondered if you could conflate today versus any time in here. I think that the book sort of portrays maybe this is the same thing that was going on with Abraham Lincoln, but I'm curious about, relevant to the times today versus your book, what's the equivalency? Because history has tended to repeat itself and people forget that.
Well, it's an excellent question, and number one, I appreciate you reading the book, because it's a lot easier to have an intelligent conversation when you do so. Not just you, but most interviewers are lazy, as you know. They really don't grasp what's going on, but you obviously have a grasp of it. There is something that is frighteningly spooky in Confronting the Presidents that directly pertains to Kamala Harris. And I couldn't have anticipated it because nobody knew the vice president would be the presidential nominee when we were writing the book. We didn't know. Mm-hmm. But this is so, I don't know what the word is, unsettling. So Warren Harding, one of the worst presidents in history, was elected in 1920, Republican. The American people had had enough of 8 years of Democrats, Woodrow Wilson, World War I. They would have voted for a chimpanzee over the Democrat. And Warren was the chimp. Nobody knew anything about him. He lives in Marion, Ohio. He's a newspaper guy. Then he gets elected to Senate. But Warren Harding, nobody knew him. Warren refuses to do any interviews. He doesn't even campaign. Now, Kamala campaigns, but won't do any meaningful interviews until 60 Minutes, which was okay, but she didn't come across very well in it, in my opinion. But anyway, the American people overwhelmingly elect Harding. Harding gets in the White House. He doesn't care about the country. He doesn't understand any of the issues. He stays up all night drinking and playing cards with his corrupt friends and chasing his mistress around the White House while his wife, Florence, sleeps upstairs. This is what Warren Harding did on a regular basis. No policy, nothing. So Americans elected somebody they had no idea about. And Harris is doing the same thing. We don't know what she believes because she changes her beliefs. We don't know if she understands the Middle East or Putin. We don't know anything about that because she's on The View, because she's on Colbert. We're not getting anything out of that. So it's a purely manufactured, just as Harding was, candidacy, and she might win.
Yeah, you know, that feels frightening to me that she might win. I'm curious I know you got a lot of followers. I mean, you've been, on Fox for all those years, and you became really well known, like one of the most well-known people in the world. I'm curious as to, maybe you won't even answer this question, but is half the population stupid? I can't understand it. I don't even understand the idea that we can get gaslit in the way we're getting, and I'm getting a little political, but like, I'm just curious, obviously you can't answer that question because you have a lot of both sides of fans, but what's the problem now? Or is this just a history repeating itself? Was it like this before?
No, it's not history repeating itself. So what's happened is that the United States of America has become a very selfish nation. And there are a couple of reasons for that. One is bad parenting. So parents, and a lot of them are in my generation, baby boomers, are obsessed with themselves. And they put their own pursuits ahead of their children. They don't teach the children the basics. Live in America. It's what America is about. This is your responsibility to other people. Religion is cascading down. It's not important anymore. We're living in a secular society. There's no basis, fundamental basis of citizenship in this country. Public schools, same thing. It's all woke. I don't want to say anything. I don't want to be controversial. I taught high school history for 2 years. I know how to do it. It's not being done. But this overwhelmingly is the reason. So now we have a handheld escape. This is like a pipe of opium right here, okay? It's addictive. And it was manufactured to be addictive. So a kid gets this when he's 10 or she's 9 or whatever, and his or her whole life, childhood, is wrapped around this, all right? Everything else is not reality. This is reality. Texting, going on, whatever sites you want to go on. So what happened in America's past, Thomas Jefferson, Constitution, Civil War, not important, okay? Because it doesn't pertain to this. When you have half the population in that circumstance, which you do, okay, the amount of knowledge they are accumulating to be a responsible citizen collapses. And that's where we are.
This podcast is sponsored by askROI.com.
People may think I'm pandering to you, but I'm not actually. When I read this book, I actually thought to myself, should the book be like required reading? Like, does anyone know this stuff? Like, what amazing presidents we did have, and people who stood up to in front of. We just do not realize how great we have it. That's what this reminded me of George Washington's own mom, like the things that or. Can you imagine the Eleanor Roosevelt? These things are just crazily. It's packed with great stuff, by the way. Sorry, I'm not pandering. I really did love the book.
No, I really appreciate that.
I really love the book.
We did that on purpose.
Yeah.
We wanted to make these people.
Right.
Because in America, we have a tendency to either demonize or mythologize.
So
we don't tell you who they are. So George Washington and his mother, they didn't like each other. Washington didn't even go to her funeral. And Eleanor Roosevelt, FDR, I mean, that was crazy.
Yeah, crazy stuff.
What was going on in the White House then. And when people see that, when they learn that, then these presidents become real people.
Sure.
Franklin Pierce was an alcoholic. He's a drunk.
Yeah, well, a couple
He was in office for 4 years.
Yeah.
And so that was part of our job as historians / reporters, to bring the truth about America, both good and bad, so that people can absorb it and make good decisions now. Because our decision making among we the people is not the best.
So, if let's say she gets elected and you have a split Democratic House and a Senate, is it more of the same, or what? I've heard some pretty smart people say that, you know, a couple, not all, that she gets elected and you got a divided House and Senate. You really don't. It doesn't really change a lot for us, or is that not your perspective?
She can do a lot of damage, as Biden has done. Biden's the second worst president ever, and I make a pretty good case for that. James Buchanan, the guy who was a coward, totally booted the Civil War before Lincoln came in, he's the worst, by far. Biden was terrible because Biden created the problems. Most bad presidents inherited them and couldn't solve them.
Right.
Herbert Hoover, Great Depression. Biden created the open border, okay? He created the massive inflation price rise. He created weakness overseas when he surrendered in Afghanistan. He created it. It was him. Was it Congress? Was it a political party? It was him. Now you got Harris, who cheerleaded all of this stuff. She didn't, you know, J.D. Vance was out there going, Harris did it, Harris did it. Harris didn't do anything. She doesn't have any power as vice president. Biden did it. But he didn't really do it because he was compromised from the very beginning with his mental problems. It was the progressive left that runs the White House now that did it. Those same people are going to run Kamala Harris if she wins. So I'm going, even though Congress will probably block the insanity that Kamala Harris is talking about with $3 trillion in new spending, I mean, the dollar will collapse if you do that, lady. Do you not understand that? And the answer is no, she doesn't understand that. She doesn't know macroeconomics like you do, all right? Doesn't. But you have a situation now where Congress can block a lot of it, but she's still got the executive order power, and she can still punish her opponents. And that's what is likely to happen if she wins.
So Trump can't get reelected after this. Obviously, he can be president for 4 more years. I know this we're looking at a long way, but I actually think he's going to get elected, and I actually think it's going to be a landslide. I actually think that we're all being gaslit. It's 2016, because I will tell you that, and I'll admit this, that I ran a super PAC, or was part of a super PAC, because I believed back then that I have 2 daughters, that the first woman president should be Hillary Clinton. And whether I was right or wrong about that, at the time I sort of longed for the time when Bill Clinton was around, because it seemed like more civility. We were talking about, like, you know, sex in the White House. We weren't talking about all the insanity, and people were friends. When I was doing the super PAC in the call center, we had lists from the Democratic Party, and we could not believe the response. People hated her. Like, we called, and they were like, we told them eventually, like, I don't know how the hell this woman's going to get elected, but the polls were saying she was getting elected. We were calling Democrats who said, I'm never giving her any money, I can't stand her, right? I don't meet anybody I don't personally meet anybody that says they're going to vote for Kamala Harris, except for maybe a couple of my, you know, really hardcore California friends. I grew up in California. I live in Vegas now. So I think it's going to be a landslide. What happens after he's president? What happens next? And I know that's a big guess, but history can repeat itself, and you're the student of this stuff. What looks like? What does it look like after that?
Well, if Trump follows his logical course, life course, he'll do pretty much what he did in his first term. He'll get a Ukrainian thing. That'll be number one. He'll get a sit down and carve out some ceasefire deal. It won't matter really much because Ukraine will get screwed, but that'll happen. Then Trump will knock out all the regulations on fossil fuel harvesting. So there'll be a lot more energy flow into not only the United States, but abroad, because the EU is buying up all of our oil now because Russia's oil is off the market. So those are 2 things he'll do right away: calm Ukraine down and knock out all the Biden regulations on fossil fuel. And when that surge comes in, that will lower grocery prices, food prices, because the truckers won't be paying as much for gas, and it's just a spiral down. That's what he's most likely to do. As far as Kamala Harris's appeal is concerned, it's thin. You're right. people aren't jumping up and down clamoring for Kamala Harris unless you're in the progressive bubble or dependent on government entitlements, so that she will carry the people who need the check from the government, because she'll up that check.
Sure.
And they know it. All right, so that vote buying is successful and always has been since the Great Depression on the Democratic side. But she is not a candidate that inspires confidence. So most of the people who will vote for Kamala Harris are voting against Donald Trump.
Right.
Just like they did in 20. Same
Right.
thing.
You got a favorite president in the book? Like, who's your favorite? Like, you got one person?
Well, Lincoln, by far. And by the way, I wrote a book called The United States of Trump, which, if you really want to understand how Trump thinks, you read that book. Abraham Lincoln, far and away the best president, because he was handled a catastrophe. Handed it by James Buchanan, who just couldn't get out of the White House fast enough. He didn't do anything to tamp down the ferocity of the rebellion in the South when he could have, but he was just a coward, as I said. So Lincoln comes in, and if you look at a picture of Abraham Lincoln when he takes office, and you look at a picture of him 4 years later, you don't think it's the same human being. And he loses a son, Lincoln, to disease. His wife's a nut. I mean, literally, after he's assassinated, the wife is put in a sanitarium, a mental place.
Right.
And he has to deal with all of this stuff. And not only does he deal with it effectively, but he's a kind, compassionate human being at the same time, which is, you can't say that for FDR, who dealt with the Depression and World War II effectively, but he was a son of a bitch. So by far and away, Lincoln, I believe, is the best president, one I most admire. And Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt, is up there, and George Washington is up there, as far as chief executives are concerned.
Mm-hmm. I know she didn't mention Ronald Reagan, but we all kind of long for the days when he was around. Was it timing for him?
No, Ronald Reagan was not presented with the unbelievable problems that the aforementioned presidents, Lincoln, Washington, and even Teddy Roosevelt, were handed. So Ronald Reagan comes in, and the country's a mess because Jimmy Carter was in way over his head. Decent man, couldn't govern. Reagan comes in with a philosophy, conservative philosophy. So less government, and the Soviet Union's the evil empire. And he works it. And he's got good guys on his team.
Yeah, he does.
All right? Reagan himself wasn't engaged very much on a day-to-day. Then he gets shot very early on, almost dies. It really takes a lot out of him. And you can read that in my book, Killing Reagan.
Yep.
But he makes a miraculous comeback. He is charismatic. He knows how to work that camera. Americans love him. Morale goes up. Economy goes up. He waxes Walter Mondale in '84 and kind of, keeps an upward trajectory for the second term. But he made mistakes. He didn't govern that well. Iran-Contra, there were other things that went on. The economy, immigration, he was the first amnesty guy, Reagan. That did not work out. So he can't be up in the top 5. I put him in the top 10, though. I got Reagan in the top 10.
I want to wrap it up. Obviously, I only have a minute of your time left, but I wondered if you've seen these things on social media. I'm sure you have, where you have a picture of the White House press secretary saying, it's not true, this didn't happen, this is totally made up. And then someone posting up something she said earlier that's the exact opposite of what she said a year before that they were doing. It's like right in front of us, hidden in plain sight. And you talk about this device in front of us, like, how do we overcome this? It seems like insanity that we don't even believe it. Right in front of us, they do it right to us. Or am I just delusional?
People don't care. They're jaded. Americans are jaded. They're just so used to being lied to. Not only by politicians, but the media lies to them every night. By omission, dodging things, not covering fairly. And so most people are cynical. They go, okay, yeah, she lied, so I've seen it a million times.
Yeah.
They all lie. That's a cliche. They all lie, right? And that's why you don't get the outrage that you might have gotten 30, 40 years ago if somebody did that, Now they just kind of accepted that that's just the culture.
I remember.
That's what we
Gary
do. So
Gary
that's what's
Hart.
going
Gary
on.
Hart had a mistress. The world came to an end, right? I mean, nowadays it's like a badge of honor or something. It doesn't make
Yeah,
any.
I mean, Gary Hart was in a wrong period of history, and they went wild on him. But now, so what?
I'm so grateful.
But you're right. I mean,
I'm so grateful you spent the 20 minutes with us. I will tell you that pretty much, I'm 54 years old, pretty much as long as I can remember, at least it feels like the last 20 years, but I might be wrong, Bill. Whenever there was a topic that I thought was complicated, I didn't know how to think about, I always felt like the way you delivered it was the best, the No Spin Zone. I love the work you did. I love the book. Congratulations on it. It reads great, and I would encourage all the parents out there, have their kids read it, learn about a little history because this history has repeated itself many times. Love the book, Bill. Thank you so much.
It's very nice of you to, number one, read the book, Todd, because I know how busy you are. You're an entrepreneur. You're doing very well. And the kind words mean a lot to me. Thanks for having me in today.
I love it, man. Take care. Be well.
This podcast is sponsored by askROI.com.
I'm going to explain it to you real quick. But don't be rolling yet. There's a reason for it.